The fine October drizzle painted the streets of Midtown Manhattan in shades of grey, creating that particular autumn melancholy that always made Edward Morgan feel a tightness in his chest. At 52, he had built a corporate empire that placed him among the wealthiest men in the country, but on that Thursday afternoon, as he drove his Mercedes-Benz through the bustling avenues, he felt strangely empty. The light turned red at the corner of Lexington Avenue, forcing him to a stop amid the chaotic traffic. Edward drummed his fingers on the leather steering wheel, his mind already racing to the next meeting, when a delicate movement caught his eye. A small girl, no more than 6, was walking between the cars with a bouquet of red roses in her thin arms. Her bare feet stepped into the puddles with a natural ease, as if the cold of the wet asphalt didn't bother her. The faded pink dress, clearly too big for her frail body, was soaked by the persistent drizzle. But it was when she approached his window that Edward felt the world stop. The child's large, expressive eyes were a deep, almost golden brown, exactly like the ones he used to gaze into years ago. The delicate features of her face, the shape of her slightly upturned nose, and especially that dimple on her chin that appeared when she smiled nervously. It all awakened a painful memory he had tried to bury for 7 years. "Mr. Buy a rose, please." The girl's trembling, desperate voice cut through the partially open window like a blade. "I need to buy medicine for my mommy. She's very sick." A shiver ran down Edward's spine. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. Those features, that expression, that dimple, it all brought him back to Helena, his ex-wife, whom he had divorced amidst bitter fights and words that should never have been spoken. What's your mother's name?" he asked in a hoarse voice, almost a whisper. The girl tilted her head, surprised by the unusual question. "Helena, Mr. Helena Ross. Why do you want to know?" Edward's world collapsed in that instant. His hands trembled on the steering wheel, and he had to lean back against the seat to keep from fainting. Helena, the same name, the same woman he had loved so intensely and lost through his own negligence. The woman who had walked out of his life, taking pieces of his heart he had never managed to recover. "How old are you?" he asked, his voice barely escaping his throat. "6, Mr. My mommy says I was born when she was very sad, but that I brought light into her life. 6 years. Edward closed his eyes and did the mental math he didn't want to do. 6 years ago, he was still married to Helena. 6 years ago, he would spend weeks at a time traveling for work, ignoring her attempts to talk, to connect, to save a marriage that was falling apart. The sound of cars honking behind him brought Edward back to reality. The light had turned green, but he remained stationary, staring at this child who could be, no, who probably was his daughter. "I'll buy all your roses," Edward said, pulling a $100 bill from his wallet with trembling hands. "Keep the change." The girl's eyes widened with surprise and gratitude. "Really, mister, all of them?" "Yes, all of them. What's your name, sweetheart?" "Louisa, Mr. Louisa Ross." Edward felt tears burn his eyes. Louisa, a name Helena had always said she wanted to give their daughter if they ever had one. A daughter he never knew existed, who was standing right in front of him, selling flowers in the rain to buy medicine for her mother. As Louisa carefully placed all the roses on the passenger seat, Edward was certain that his life had just taken a completely different turn. Nothing would ever be the same again. Edward remained parked in traffic for long minutes after Louisa had walked away, holding the wet roses as if they were precious treasures. His mind spun in circles, trying to process what had just happened. That child, with her golden eyes and dimpled chin, was the spitting image of a young Helena. 6 years. Louisa's age coincided exactly with the last turbulent months of his marriage. Edward vaguely remembered that period. He was obsessed with expanding his company into the international market, traveling constantly, ignoring Helena's increasingly desperate pleas for his attention and presence. "It can't be," he murmured to himself. but his voice sounded weak and unconvinced. He finally managed to drive to his office but was unable to focus on anything. The meeting with Japanese investors, which was supposed to be the highlight of his week, passed in a blur. His answers were automatic, his mind completely fixed on that little girl with golden eyes selling flowers in the rain. As soon as the meeting ended, Edward locked himself in his office and picked up the phone. His secretary, Sharon, a woman in her 40s who had worked with him for over a decade, answered immediately. "Sharon, I need you to find some information for me, discreetly." "Of course, Mr. Morgan, what do you need?" "I want you to find the current address for Helena Ross, my ex-wife. I need to know where she's living." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Mr. Morgan, may I ask why? It's been years since you've mentioned—" "Just do as I ask, Sharon. It's urgent." Edward hung up and walked to the panoramic window of his 20th floor office. Below, the city buzzed with its daily life, but all he could think about was Louisa. If she really was his daughter, how could he have lived all these years without knowing she existed? The phone rang 2 hours later. "Mr. Morgan, I have the information you requested. Helena Ross lives at 47 Crane Street in the South Bronx. It's a very rough neighborhood, sir." Edward jotted down the address with trembling hands. The South Bronx, one of the city's poorest areas, where entire families lived in precarious conditions. The woman who had once shared a mansion with him now lived on the outskirts of the city. "Anything else, Sharon?" "Yes, sir. She works as a cleaner for a few commercial businesses, but according to my sources, she's been on leave for a few months due to health problems. There are records indicating she has a 6-year-old daughter." Edward closed his eyes. A 6-year-old daughter. "Louisa, there's one more thing, Mr. Morgan. The child has no father listed on her birth certificate. It only lists the mother's name." The phone slipped from Edward's hand and clattered to the floor. No father listed. That meant Helena had raised Louisa alone, without financial support, without any help. While he was accumulating millions, his possible daughter was growing up in poverty. Edward cancelled all his appointments for the rest of the week and left his office like a man in a trance. He drove to the South Bronx, a journey that would normally take an hour but felt like an eternity to him. Crane Street was a sequence of run-down tenements and shabby buildings, with gutters running with murky water and children playing barefoot in the street. Number 47 was a dilapidated building with a patched-up roof and brick walls covered in graffiti. Edward parked his car a safe distance away and watched. There was no movement from the apartment, but he could see a faint light coming from within. His heart hammered in his chest as he imagined Helena inside, sick, taking care of a child who could be his daughter. Suddenly, the door opened and Louisa came out, carrying a bucket of water. She seemed even more fragile under the fading evening light, her movements slow and tired for such a young child. Edward wanted to get out of the car, run to her, hold her, and take her far away from that place, but something held him in the driver's seat. Fear. Fear of discovering the truth he already knew in his heart. Fear of facing the consequences of years of neglect. When Louisa went back inside, Edward finally managed to move. But instead of approaching, he started the car and drove home, knowing he had just made the most cowardly decision of his life. Edward spent a sleepless night pacing the empty halls of his mansion like a tormented ghost. Every room in the luxurious house echoed with memories of Helena. The living room where she used to read her books, the garden she tended with such care, the bedroom where they had slept together for 5 years before it all fell apart. At 6 in the morning, unable to bear another minute of uncertainty, Edward made a decision that would change everything. He put on simple clothes, got in his car, and drove back to the South Bronx. This time, he wouldn't run away. The neighborhood was slowly waking up. Women carried laundry baskets, men left for work on bicycles, children ran through the streets. Edward parked a block away from Helena's building and walked nervously toward it. The door was slightly ajar, and he could hear voices from inside. One was unmistakably Helena's, though weaker and more tired than he remembered. The other was the sweet voice of Louisa. "Mommy, you can't get up today. The doctor said you need to rest." "My sweet girl, I have to work. We don't have money for this week's medicine." "I'll sell more flowers, Mommy. Yesterday, a very kind man bought all my roses and gave me a lot of money." Edward felt his heart break. That 6-year-old child was taking on responsibilities that not even adults should have to bear. And worse, she was talking about him, unaware that she was describing the man who could be her father. "Louisa, my love, I don't want you going out alone to sell flowers. It's dangerous." "But Mommy, how will we buy food? How will we pay the rent?" Edward heard the sound of Helena crying softly, trying to stifle her sobs so as not to worry her daughter. The woman who had once been his wife, who had shared dreams and plans with him, was now crying in despair while her 6-year-old daughter tried to comfort her. He couldn't stand it anymore. He knocked gently on the wooden door. "Who is it?" Helena's voice sounded frightened. "It's me, Helena. Edward." The silence that followed was deafening. Edward could imagine the shock, the confusion, perhaps even the fear Helena must be feeling. After long minutes, the door opened just a crack. Helena appeared in the doorway, and Edward had to lean against the frame to keep from falling. The woman he had loved was unrecognizable, far too thin, with deep dark circles under her eyes, hair without its shine, and a pallor that betrayed illness. But her golden brown eyes were the same, and in them Edward saw a mixture of surprise, pain, and a profound anger. "What do you want here, Edward?" "Helena, I need to talk to you. After 7 years, after never returning any of my calls." Edward's blood ran cold. "What calls? Don't pretend you don't know. I tried to contact you dozens of times. Your secretary always said you were busy, that you were traveling, that you couldn't be disturbed. Helena, I swear I never got any calls from you. I never knew." "Mommy, who is it?" Louisa's voice interrupted the tense conversation. Edward looked over Helena's shoulder and saw the little girl approaching curiously. When their eyes met, Louisa smiled in recognition. "Hi, Rose Mister." Helena followed her daughter's gaze, and when she saw Edward looking at Louisa with an expression of pain and recognition, she understood immediately. Her eyes widened in horror. "No," Helena whispered. "No, no, no." "Helena, please, let me explain." "Go away, Edward. Go away now." "Mommy, why are you mad at the kind Mister?" Louisa tugged at the hem of her mother's dress, not understanding the tension in the air. Edward looked at the daughter he never knew he had, at the woman he had abandoned without knowing she was pregnant, and felt the crushing weight of 7 years of neglect come crashing down on his shoulders. "Helena, she's my daughter, isn't she?" The question came out as a desperate whisper, but Helena heard it clearly. Her tears began to fall, and she hugged Louisa against her chest as if protecting the girl from a storm. "Now you want to know. After 7 years?" Edward reached a trembling hand toward Louisa, but Helena recoiled, slamming the door in his face with a bang that echoed down the street. Edward stood before the closed door for almost an hour, listening to the muffled sounds of Helena trying to calm Louisa, who didn't understand why her mother had become so upset. Every sob he could hear was like a stab to his chest. Finally, he returned to his car, but he couldn't get the image of a thin, sick Helena out of his mind, nor the confused eyes of Louisa when the door slammed shut. For the first time in years, Edward couldn't work. He sat in his office staring at the phone, thinking about the calls Helena had mentioned. "Sharon," he called his secretary on the intercom. "I need to speak with you, now." When Sharon entered the room, Edward studied her with different eyes. The woman he had considered efficient and loyal suddenly looked nervous, avoiding his gaze. "Sharon, I want you to tell me the truth. During the last few years of my marriage, did Helena try to call me?" Sharon's face turned pale. Mr. Morgan, The truth, Sharon. How many times did Helena try to talk to me? She called almost every day during the last few months before the divorce. But you always said you didn't want to talk to her, that you were busy with business, that... I never said that. Edward shot up from his chair, his voice echoing through the office. Never. You never put her calls through to me. Sharon looked down, her hands trembling. Mr. Morgan, I thought I was protecting you. She seemed so desperate, so distraught. I thought she would just get in the way of your work, like she always did. Like she always did. Helena never got in the way of my work. But sir, she was always asking for attention, always wanting you to stay home, always complaining about your trips. I thought if I didn't pass along the calls, she would give up and you could focus on the company. Edward felt the world spin around him. Sharon had filtered his calls, had decided for him who deserved his attention, and one of those calls, perhaps the most important one of his life, had been about Helena's pregnancy. "No, Sharon, you're fired. I want you to clear out your desk and leave immediately." "Mr. Morgan, please, I was only trying to help. I've always taken care of you, always did what I thought was best. Get out, Sharon, now." After the secretary left, Edward locked himself in his office and wept, as he hadn't wept since his parents died. He wept for the wife he had lost, the daughter he had never met, and the 7 years stolen from his life. The next day, Edward hired a discreet private investigator. He needed concrete proof, needed to understand the whole story. The man, named Robert Kane, was known for his discretion and efficiency. "I want you to investigate everything about Helena Ross and her daughter Louisa, but be discreet. I don't want them to know I'm looking into this." Robert returned 3 days later with a detailed report that completely shattered Edward. "Mr. Morgan, Helena Ross tried to contact you 127 times during the last 3 months of your marriage. All the calls were blocked by your secretary. She even came to your office in person twice, but was prevented from going up by security, who said they had orders not to let her pass." Edward closed his eyes, feeling nauseous. After the divorce, she found out she was pregnant. She tried to contact you another 67 times during the pregnancy. Again, all calls were blocked. She even sent a registered letter to your residence, but according to postal records, the letter was returned marked addressee not found. I never received any letter. Your secretary signed for it and filed it away. I managed to get a copy. Here it is. Edward opened the letter with trembling hands. It was from Helena, dated 6 months before Louisa's birth. "Edward, I know you don't want to speak to me, but I need you to know that I'm pregnant. The baby is yours. I know our marriage is over, but you have a right to know you're going to be a father. Please call me. I need to talk to you about this child's future." The letter fell from Edward's hands. He had lost the chance to be present for his daughter's birth, to help Helena during her pregnancy, to be the father Louisa deserved from the very beginning. There's one more thing, Mr. Morgan. Helena never remarried. She raised Louisa alone, working 3 different jobs to make ends meet. 2 years ago, she was diagnosed with a serious illness that requires expensive treatment. She lost 2 of her 3 jobs because she could no longer work regularly. Edward knew his life had just changed forever. There were no more doubts. Louisa was his daughter, and he had lost the first 6 years of her life because of the interference of a possessive secretary and his own negligence. Edward spent the next week developing a desperate plan to get closer to Helena and Louisa. He knew a direct approach would be rejected immediately, so he decided to act with subtlety, even if it meant watching from a distance the life he should have shared. Every morning, he would park his car a safe distance from Helena's building and watch. Louisa always left at 7:30 to sell flowers downtown, carrying her small bouquet with the determination of an adult. Edward would follow her discreetly, ensuring her safety as the little girl worked the streets. It was during one of these mornings that he witnessed a scene that broke his heart. Louisa was on the corner of Lexington Avenue, offering her flowers to passers-by when a group of older boys approached her. Edward couldn't hear the conversation, but he saw when one of them shoved Louisa, causing her to drop all her roses on the wet ground. Instinctively, Edward got out of the car and ran toward the commotion. When he arrived, Louisa was on her knees, trying to salvage the damaged flowers, with tears streaming down her face. "Leave her alone," Edward said with a firm voice to the boys, who immediately scattered at the sight of an approaching adult. "Rose, mister!" Louisa looked up, surprised and relieved. "They ruined my flowers. How am I going to buy Mommy's medicine now?" Edward knelt beside his daughter, helping her gather the roses that were still in good condition. "Don't worry, I'll buy them all, just like I always do." "But you always come in the afternoon. Why are you here in the morning?" Edward quickly improvised. I work nearby. Sometimes I pass this street on my way to the office." Louisa smiled, and Edward felt his heart warm. "You're very kind, mister. What's your name? I've always wanted to know." "Edward." "My name is Edward." "Edward," Louisa repeated, testing the name. "That's a nice name. My mommy sometimes gets sad and says a name like that when she thinks I'm not listening." Edward swallowed hard. "What name does she say?" "I don't remember exactly, but it sounds like yours." For the next hour, Edward accompanied Louisa as she worked, not only buying her roses, but also helping her sell them to other passers-by. For the first time in his life, he experienced the simple joy of being with his daughter, even if she didn't know who he really was. "You know, Mr. Edward, you're different from other adults," Louisa said as they walked down the street. "Most people don't even look at me, but you always treat me like I'm important." "You are important, Louisa, very important. To you, too." Edward had to blink several times to hold back tears. "Yes, sweetheart. To me, you're the most important person in the world." Louisa stopped walking and stared at him curiously. "Why? You don't even know me that well." "Sometimes, Louisa, you meet people who are special from the very first moment you see them. It's like they were always a part of your life, even if you only just found that out now." The little girl nodded as if she understood perfectly. "That's how I feel about you, Mr. Edward. When you bought my roses that first day, I felt you were different. It seemed like you were sad, but it also seemed like you knew me from somewhere." Edward knelt in front of his daughter, looking into the golden eyes that were so much like Helena's. "Louisa, if you could make a wish, any wish in the world, what would you wish for?" "That's easy," she answered without hesitation. "I'd wish for my mommy to get better. She's been sick for a long time, and I know she's scared, even if she tries to pretend everything is okay. And if your mommy got better, what else would you wish for?" Louisa thought for a moment. "I'd wish to have a dad. All the other kids have a dad, but I don't. My mommy says my dad left before I was born, but sometimes I dream that he comes back and we're a real family." Edward felt as if a dagger had been thrust through his chest. His daughter dreamed of him, not knowing he was right there, in front of her, desperate to be a part of her life. "Louisa, I'm sure your dad, wherever he is, he would love to meet you." "Do you really think so?" "I'm absolutely sure." When it was time for Louisa to go home, Edward knew he couldn't put off the inevitable any longer. He had to find a way to get close to Helena, to prove that he had changed, to show that he was willing to do anything to be part of their lives. But as they neared the building, Edward saw an ambulance parked in front of number 47. Louisa dropped the remaining flowers on the ground and ran toward the ambulance, screaming, "Mommy!" With a voice that pierced Edward's heart. He followed her, trying to process the scene unfolding before his eyes. 2 paramedics were coming out of the building, carrying Helena on a stretcher. She was conscious but visibly weak, her skin even paler than the last time Edward had seen her. When she heard Louisa's voice, she tried to lift her head. "My sweet girl, don't worry. Mommy's going to be okay," Helena said in a faint voice, trying to smile to reassure the child. "Where are you taking my mommy?" Louisa asked the paramedics, clinging to the side of the stretcher. To City Hospital, honey. Your mom needs urgent medical care, one of the men replied kindly. Can I go with you? The paramedics exchanged uncertain glances. Well, do you have a guardian who can come with you? I don't have anyone. I only have my mommy. Edward slowly approached. Helena saw him and her eyes widened, a mixture of surprise and desperation on her face. Edward, what are you doing here? I can take Louisa to the hospital, Helena. I can come with you. No. Helena's response was immediate and firm despite her weakness. I don't want you near my daughter. Helena, please. She can't be alone. Mr. Edward knows my mummy. Louisa looked confusedly from one to the other. One of the paramedics interrupted the argument. Sorry, but we have to go now. The patient's condition is serious. Please. Helena held Louisa's hand. Go with Mrs. Diaz, our neighbor. She'll take care of you until I'm back. But Mommy, I want to stay with you. You can't, my love. The hospital doesn't let children stay. Edward watched the farewell between mother and daughter, seeing the desperation in both their eyes. When the ambulance drove off, Louisa stood in the street, crying silently. Louisa, Edward approached gently. Your mother is going to be fine. The doctors will take care of her. Mr. Edward, how do you know my mommy? Edward took a deep breath. We've known each other for a long time, before you were born. Were you friends? We were more than friends, Louisa. We were very close. The neighbor Helena had mentioned. Mrs. Diaz appeared at her door. She was a woman of about 60, with a kind but worried face. Louisa, dear, come here. You'll stay with me until your mother comes back. I don't want to stay, Mrs. Diaz. I want to go to the hospital. Edward knelt in front of his daughter. Louisa, listen to me. I'm going to the hospital to check on your mother, and then I'll come back and tell you how she is. Okay. You promise? I promise. Edward left Louisa with Mrs. Diaz and drove quickly to City Hospital. When he arrived, he found that Helena had been admitted in serious condition. Her illness, which he now learned was a severe kidney complication, had worsened drastically. Doctor, what is patient Helena Ross's condition? Edward asked the attending physician. Are you a relative, sir? Edward hesitated for a moment. I'm a close family friend. Well, the situation is complicated. She needs urgent surgery, but it's an expensive and risky procedure. Without the proper treatment, she may not survive more than a few weeks. How much does the surgery cost? Around $150,000, including all procedures and the recovery period. Edward didn't hesitate. I'll pay for it, all of it. Sir, that's a significant amount. Are you sure? Doctor, do whatever is necessary to save this woman. Money is not an object. When Edward returned to pick up Louisa, he found the girl sitting on Mrs. Diaz's porch, staring intently in the direction the ambulance had gone. Mr. Edward, how's my mommy? Edward sat down beside his daughter. She's being well taken care of, Louisa. The best doctors are looking after her. Is she going to be okay? Edward hugged Louisa, feeling for the first time the warmth of his daughter in his arms. I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure your mother gets better. That's a promise. Why do you care so much about us, Mr. Edward? Edward looked into his daughter's golden eyes, identical to Helena's, and knew he couldn't hide the truth for much longer. Because you are the most important people in my life, Louisa. Even if you don't know it yet, Edward decided he could no longer live a lie. The next day, after visiting Helena at the hospital where she remained sedated before surgery, he returned to Mrs. Diaz's home with a determination he hadn't felt in years. Louisa, I need to talk to you about something very important. The girl, who was sadly playing with an old doll in the yard, looked up at him. Is it about my mommy? Is she worse? No, sweetheart, it's about me and you. Edward sat on the ground next to Louisa, trying to find the words for a conversation that would change both their lives forever. Louisa, Do you remember asking me why I care so much about you and your mom? I remember. You said we're important to you. That's true, but there's a specific reason for that. Edward took a deep breath. Louisa, you know your mommy and I knew each other a long time ago, right? You said you were more than friends. That's right. We were married, Louisa. Your mother was my wife. Louisa's eyes widened. You were married, but then, does that mean? It means I'm your father, Louisa. The silence that followed was deafening. Louisa looked at Edward with an expression that mixed confusion, hope, and fear. You're my daddy, the daddy who left before I was born. Tears began to stream down Edward's face. Yes, my sweet girl, but I didn't leave because I wanted to. I never knew you existed. What do you mean you didn't know? Edward explained about the blocked calls, the letter he never received, how he had only found out about her a few days ago. Louisa listened in silence, processing information that was too big for her 6-year-old mind. So you didn't abandon me on purpose? Never, Louisa. If I had known you existed, I would have moved heaven and earth to be with you from day one. Louisa threw herself into Edward's arms, crying, I always wanted a daddy. I always dreamed that one day you would come back. Edward held his daughter, feeling as if his heart would burst with emotion. I'm here now, my girl, and I'm never leaving again. But the joy of the moment was interrupted when Mrs. Diaz appeared at the door, her face worried. Edward, there are 2 people here who want to talk to you. They say they're from Child Protective Services. Edward's blood ran cold. 2 uniformed women approached, carrying clipboards and with serious expressions. Sir, we're from CPS. We received an anonymous tip that a child is living in inadequate conditions at this address. What kind of tip? Edward asked, instinctively pulling Louisa closer to him. Information that the child's mother is hospitalized and that she is in the care of individuals with no legal family ties. We need to assess the situation and, if necessary, take the girl to a temporary shelter until the situation is resolved. No. Louisa clung to Edward's arm. I don't want to go to a shelter. I want to stay with my daddy. One of the caseworkers frowned. Your father? Sir, can you prove you are the child's father? Edward felt the ground give way beneath his feet. He had no documents, no legal recognition, no way to prove in that moment that Louisa was his daughter. We just found each other. I'm arranging for a DNA test, but without legal proof of paternity, I'm afraid we can't leave the child in your care. It's protocol. Please, Edward begged. She's my daughter. I can prove it. I just need a few days. Daddy, don't let them take me, Louisa cried desperately. The second caseworker approached gently. Honey, it's just temporary. You'll stay in a safe place until everything is sorted out. Wait, Edward had a desperate idea. What if I get a court injunction? If I file for legal recognition of paternity right now? Even so, sir, without a definitive court order, we can't leave the child with you, and the process could take weeks. Edward watched his daughter, whom he had found only minutes ago, being led away by strangers. Louisa was screaming for him, reaching her little arms out to him. Daddy, Daddy, don't let me go. Louisa, I will come for you. I promise I will come and get you. When the CPS car disappeared down the street, Edward collapsed to the ground. In a matter of hours, he had gained a daughter and lost her again. But this time, he knew exactly who she was and where she was. And he would move the world to bring her back. Edward didn't sleep that night. He spent the hours calling the best lawyers in the city, leveraging influential contacts, and preparing for a legal battle like none he had ever faced. For the first time in his life, his fortune and power weren't for profit. They were for getting his daughter back. The next morning, accompanied by his lawyer, Charles Miller, Esq., Edward arrived at the CPS office determined to bring Louisa home. I need to see my daughter, Edward told the receptionist. Sir, visits to the shelter are controlled. You need to schedule. You don't understand, Mr. Miller interrupted, placing a file of documents on the counter. My client is filing for an emergency custody order and recognition of paternity. We have already collected genetic material for the DNA test and have witnesses who can confirm his relationship with the child's mother. The CPS supervisor, a serious woman named Dr. Patricia, received them in her office. Mr. Morgan, I understand your situation, but we must follow protocol. The child is being well cared for at the temporary shelter and, Doctor, with all due respect, Edward leaned forward, my daughter shouldn't be in a shelter at all. She has a father who can care for her, has the resources to have the best possible life, and is being separated from me over a bureaucratic issue. You were absent from this child's life for 6 years. I wasn't absent. Edward slammed his fist on the table. I didn't know she existed. My former secretary intercepted all of her mother's attempts to contact me. I have proof. Mr. Miller opened the file. Here are the phone records, the intercepted letters, the sworn statement from the former secretary confessing to the interference. My client was the victim of deliberate sabotage. Dr. Patricia examined the documents carefully. This is quite extraordinary, but legally we still... Doctor, Edward changed his tone, trying to control his emotion. Please, just let me see my daughter. 5 minutes. She's scared, confused. She needs to know I haven't abandoned her again. After a long pause, Dr. Patricia agreed. 5 minutes. Supervised. When Edward saw Louisa in the shelter's visiting room, his heart broke. The little girl was sitting alone in a small chair, swinging her legs and looking out the window. When she saw him, her eyes lit up. Daddy, you came to get me! Edward knelt and hugged her. Of course I did, my girl. I told you I would never abandon you again. When can I go home? This place is strange. The other kids cry a lot at night. Very soon, Louisa. Daddy is sorting out some important things so you can come live with me. And Mommy, how is she? Edward swallowed hard. Helena had undergone surgery the night before and was still in the ICU. She's recovering, sweetie. The doctors are taking very good care of her. Daddy, when Mommy gets better, are we going to be a real family? Louisa's innocent question hit Edward like a thunderbolt. He hadn't thought about that. What if Helena recovered but still rejected him? What if she couldn't forgive his years of absence? Louisa, Mommy and Daddy, we aren't married anymore, but that doesn't mean we can't be a family. Families come in many different forms. A social worker interrupted their conversation. Mr. Morgan, your time is up. No. Louisa clung to her father's neck. I want to go with you. Soon, my girl. Very soon. As Edward left the shelter, he received a call that changed everything. It was from the hospital. Helena had woken up from surgery and was asking for Louisa. At the hospital, Edward found Helena weak but conscious. When she saw him, her face contorted with anger. Where is my daughter, Edward? Helena, I need to tell you something. Child Protective Services took Louisa to a temporary shelter. What? Helena tried to sit up in bed, but she was too weak. Why? They received an anonymous tip, and when they found out I had no legal proof of paternity. You told her. Helena's voice was a dangerous whisper. Yes, Helena. She had a right to know. You had no right to do that. You have no right to show up in our lives after 7 years and mess everything up. Helena, I'm trying to help. I paid for your entire surgery. I'm fighting to get Louisa back. I didn't ask for your help. And I don't want your money. Charles Miller, who had accompanied Edward, approached the bed. Mrs. Ross, I need to inform you of something important. If you oppose Mr. Morgan's recognition of paternity, Louisa could remain in the shelter for months, perhaps years, until the matter is resolved in court. Helena looked at the lawyer, then at Edward. Are you blackmailing me? No. Edward sat beside the bed. Helena, I know you hate me. You have every right. But Louisa doesn't deserve to pay for our mistakes. She wants a family. She wants a father. And I want to be that father. Helena closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. I raised her alone for 6 years. Edward, 6 years of struggling, working, suffering, and now you show up and want to take her away. I don't want to take her from you. I want us to be partners for her best interests." Helena was silent for long minutes. Finally, she opened her eyes and looked directly at Edward. "If I agree to this, I have conditions." Edward held his breath, waiting for the words from Helena that would define the future of his newfound family. The silence in the hospital room was broken only by the steady beeping of the medical monitors. "First condition," Helena began, her voice weak but determined. "You will not take Louisa from me. She can know you. She can have you as a father. But I am still her primary parent. She lives with me." Edward nodded quickly. "Agreed. I just want to be part of her life." "Second condition, you will not use your money to humiliate me or to make Louisa think her life with me was bad. I don't want her growing up thinking that poverty is the same as a lack of love." "Helena, I would never do that." "Third condition," Helena's voice grew harder, "you will prove that you've changed. I don't want empty promises like the ones you made when we were married. I want consistency, a real presence, not just money." Edward leaned forward. "What do you want me to do to prove it?" "I want you to step down from running your company." The room fell completely silent. Charles Miller coughed uncomfortably, but Edward didn't take his eyes off Helena. "You want me to do what?" "You heard me. Your obsession with work destroyed our marriage and made me raise our daughter alone. If you truly want to be her father, prove that she is more important than your business." "Helena, that's extreme. The company is my life's work." "Exactly. And if Louisa is going to be your daughter, she needs to be your priority, not just another item on your schedule." Edward ran his hands through his hair, feeling the weight of the choice before him. His company was worth hundreds of millions, the work of a lifetime. For how long? 1 year. Step away from the business completely for 1 year. Prove that you can live without working 16 hours a day. Prove that you can be a present father. "And if I do that, you'll agree to shared custody. You'll let Louisa know me as her father." Helena closed her eyes, clearly struggling with conflicting emotions. "If you do that, and if Louisa wants to, we can try to build some kind of family, not as a couple, oh Edward, never again, but as parents who put their daughter's well-being above all else." Charles Miller finally interjected. "Mr. Morgan, I must advise you to think carefully about this. Stepping away from the company for a year could have enormous financial consequences." Edward looked at his lawyer, then back at Helena. "Mr. Miller, do you have children?" "I do." "Sir, then you understand that there is no financial value that can compare to being a father to the most important person in your life." Edward turned back to Helena. "I accept your conditions, all of them." Helena's eyes flew open, surprised. You really accept?" "Helena, I've already lost the first 6 years of my daughter's life. I'm not losing another day to pride or ambition." At that moment, a nurse entered the room. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's a child downstairs asking for her mother. She ran away from the shelter." Edward and Helena looked at each other. "Louisa," they said at the same time. "She couldn't have come alone." Edward stood up, alarmed. "It's too dangerous." "Sir, she came with an elderly woman who said she's your neighbor, there at the reception desk." Edward raced to the ground floor and found Louisa clinging to Mrs. Diaz's hand, both their faces etched with worry. "Daddy!" Louisa ran into his arms. "I ran away. I couldn't stand being away from Mommy anymore." "Louisa, that was very dangerous. You can't just leave the shelter like that." "But I wanted to see my Mommy. They said she was sick." Mrs. Diaz approached. "Edward, she showed up at my door crying, said she had run away from the shelter and asked me to bring her here. I didn't have the heart to refuse." "Daddy, can I see my Mommy now?" Edward looked at his daughter, then at Mrs. Diaz. "Louisa, first we have to deal with the shelter situation. You can't just run away." "But I don't want to go back there. I want to stay with you and Mommy." "Sweetheart, things are complicated. But Daddy just talked to Mommy, and I think we've found a solution. Edward picked Louisa up. Let's go up and see Mommy. But then you'll have to go back to the shelter for just a few more days. Until we sort everything out properly. You promise you'll come get me soon? Edward looked into his daughter's golden eyes, thinking of the sacrifice he had just agreed to make. A year away from the company he had built, a year dedicated entirely to learning how to be a father. I promise, my girl, very soon we're going to be a real family. When they reached Helena's room, Louisa ran to her mother's bed. The reunion between mother and daughter was emotional, and Edward watched from a distance, realizing he still had a long way to go to earn his place in their relationship. But for the first time in weeks, he felt hope. Helena had opened a door, even if it came with difficult conditions, and Edward was willing to pay any price to walk through it. In the following days, Edward put the most radical decision of his life into practice. He called an emergency meeting with his company's board of directors and announced his temporary leave of absence, leaving the vice president in charge for the next 12 months. "Mr. Morgan, this is madness," protested the CFO. "The company needs your leadership, especially now with the new international contracts. The company will survive. You are all competent professionals," Edward replied with a calmness that surprised everyone. "My daughter, however, will only be 6 years old once." Meanwhile, Charles Miller worked tirelessly on the legal aspects. The DNA test officially confirmed what Edward already knew in his heart. Louisa was indeed his daughter. With this proof and Helena's agreement, they obtained a court order allowing Louisa to leave the shelter and be placed under the joint custody of her parents. Edward's first day as an official father was a mixture of joy and nervousness. Helena had been discharged from the hospital and was recovering at home, still weak but stable. Edward arrived in the morning to pick up Louisa to spend the day together. "Daddy, where are we going?" Louisa asked, bouncing with excitement. "Wherever you want, my girl. Can I really choose?" Edward knelt in front of her. "Louisa, from now on, you will always have a voice in our decisions. Always." Louisa thought for a moment. "I want to go to the park. I've never been to a real park. I've only seen them from the bus window." Edward felt his heart ache. His 6-year-old daughter had never been to a park. While other children her age were living normal childhood experiences, Louisa had been working, selling flowers to buy medicine. At the park, Edward discovered that being a father was far more challenging than running a multinational corporation. Louisa had endless energy, a curiosity about everything, and asked questions he didn't know how to answer. "Daddy, why don't you and Mommy live together if you love me?" "Well, Louisa, sometimes adults who once loved each other can't live together anymore. But that doesn't mean they've stopped caring about each other. But can you try again?" Edward pushed the swing where Louisa was sitting. "The most important thing right now is for Mommy and Daddy to learn how to be a family, even if we live in different houses." Over the following weeks, Edward fully immersed himself in fatherhood. He took Louisa to school, helped with her homework, read her stories before bed. Every moment was a discovery, his daughter's tastes, her fears, her dreams. One afternoon, while they were having a picnic in the garden of the new house Edward had rented near Helena's, Louisa asked a question that caught him off guard. "Daddy, do you miss your work?" Edward stopped unpacking the sandwiches. "Why do you ask?" "Because sometimes you look at your phone with a sad face, and Mommy said you were very important at a big company." Edward put his phone aside and lay on the grass next to his daughter. "Louisa, you want to know something? I used to think my work was the most important thing in the world. I thought it defined me as a person, and it doesn't. No, my sweet girl. I've discovered that the most important thing in the world is being here with you, watching you grow, being a part of your life. Work is just work, but being your father, that's who I really am." Louisa snuggled into Edward's arm. "I like it when you talk like that." "Like what?" With a daddy voice. "At first, you talk to me like you talk to other adults. Now you talk to me like my friends. Daddies talk to them." Edward laughed. realizing his daughter had noticed his evolution as a father better than he had himself. That night, when he took Louisa back to Helena, he found his ex-wife in the kitchen, making tea. "How was your day?" Helena asked, not looking directly at him. "It was perfect. She's incredible, Helena. You did a wonderful job raising her." Helena finally faced him. "Edward, can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "Do you really not miss the company? Don't you feel the urge to go back?" Edward thought of Louisa's question from earlier. "I do miss it, but you know what I've discovered. I don't miss the person I was when I worked there, the man who put meetings before his family, who thought financial success was more important than relationships." Helena poured 2 cups of tea. "Sometimes I look at you playing with Louisa, and it's hard to reconcile that with the man I remember. People can change, Helena." "I've changed." "I hope so, Edward, for her sake." As Edward left the house that night, he realized he was beginning to win not only his daughter's love, but perhaps, slowly, Helena's respect. It was a start. 2 months after Edward began his new life as a dedicated father, an unexpected event would shake the fragile stability they had managed to build. Louisa was spending the weekend with Edward when he received a call that would change everything. "Edward, it's Robert Kane, the private investigator. I need to speak with you urgently." "Robert, I thought our investigation was over. There's something I discovered by chance, and I think you need to know. Can I come to your house?" An hour later, Robert arrived, carrying a thick folder of documents. Louisa was playing in the garden, allowing the adults to talk in private. "Edward, while organizing the final files on the case, I found something that was previously overlooked. Your former secretary, Sharon, didn't act alone." Edward frowned. "What do you mean?" "She had an accomplice. Someone who was guiding her on how to intercept Helena's calls and correspondence." "Who?" Robert opened the folder and pulled out several photographs and documents. "Your minority partner in the company, Roger Andrews. He's been in love with you for years." Edward felt the floor drop out from under him. Roger had been his friend for over 15 years, someone he trusted implicitly. "That makes no sense. Roger always supported my marriage to Helena." "No, Edward. He funded the sabotage. He paid Sharon an extra salary to intercept any contact from Helena. The idea was that, with you unaware of the pregnancy, he would have a better chance of getting closer to you when you were vulnerable after the divorce." Edward examined the documents, bank transfers, text messages, even recordings of conversations between Sharon and Roger, planning how to keep Helena away from him. Roger even hired a security firm to have Helena's registered letter returned as addressee not found, even though you were in the city, Robert continued. "Why didn't you find this before?" "They used shell companies, offshore accounts. It was a sophisticated operation. I only found out now because Sharon, apparently overcome with guilt, sought out a lawyer to confess everything. The lawyer contacted me." Edward stood up, pacing the room nervously. "Are you telling me I lost 6 years of my daughter's life because of a conspiracy?" "Exactly. And there's more. Roger is still trying to sabotage you. He recently tried to convince the company board to declare your leave of absence as a breach of duty so he could take over your position." At that moment, Louisa ran into the room. "Daddy, can I call Mommy? I want to tell her about the sandcastle we made." Edward knelt and hugged his daughter, trying to control the rage he felt. "Of course, sweetie. Use the phone in the kitchen." When Louisa left, Edward turned back to Robert. "I want you to gather every piece of evidence. I'm going to sue Roger for everything he's done." "Edward, there's something else you need to know." Sharon confessed that Roger was also behind the anonymous tip to Child Protective Services. "What?" "He found out you had met Louisa and was afraid it would lead you back to Helena. So he anonymously reported a child at risk." Edward sat down heavily. Roger had not only destroyed his family, but was also responsible for Louisa being taken to a shelter. "Daddy," Louisa returned from the kitchen. "Mommy wants to talk to you." Edward took the phone with trembling hands. Helena? Edward, something strange just happened. A man came to my apartment asking about you and Louisa. He introduced himself as Roger, said he was your partner and that he was worried about you. What did he want? He asked strange questions about our relationship, about whether you had really changed, if I trusted leaving Louisa with you. He kept saying you've always been emotionally unstable. Edward closed his eyes. Helena, that man is dangerous. Don't talk to him again. Edward, you're scaring me. What's going on? I just found out that Roger was the one who orchestrated our entire separation. He was the one who stopped you from contacting me about the pregnancy. The silence on the other end of the line was long and heavy. Edward, if that's true, it is true, Helena. I have all the proof right here. Oh my God. Helena's voice was trembling. That means you really didn't know about Louisa. I never knew, Helena. If I had known, I would never have left you two alone. Louisa tugged on her father's shirt hem. Daddy, why do you have an angry look on your face? Edward knelt beside his daughter. Daddy just found out that some bad people did very bad things to our family, sweetheart. But don't you worry. We're going to fix everything. Are you going to protect us? Edward looked at his daughter, then at Robert, who was organizing the evidence that would destroy Roger. Yes, my girl, I will protect you from anyone who ever tries to separate us again. That night, for the first time since their reunion, Helena agreed to have dinner at Edward's house. While Louisa slept on the sofa after the meal, the two talked about the day's revelations. Edward, I need to apologize. All these years, I thought you had abandoned me on purpose. You had no way of knowing, Helena. But I should have tried harder. I should have come in person. Roger made sure that wouldn't happen. He manipulated everything. Helena looked at her sleeping daughter. What do we do now? Edward followed her gaze. Now, we protect our family. And I promise you, Roger will pay for every single day he stole from us. Edward decided to confront Roger directly. The next morning, after dropping Louisa at school, he drove to his company's headquarters for the first time in months. The employees greeted him with surprise and delight, but Edward had only one goal in mind. Roger was in his office, sitting in the chair that had once been Edward's, as if he already owned the company. When he saw Edward walk in, he tried to mask his nervousness with a false smile. Edward, what a surprise! How's this devoted dad phase treating you? Roger, we need to talk alone. Of course. Sit down. Coffee. You look tense. Edward closed the door and stood before the desk. I know everything, Roger. The smile vanished from Roger's face. I don't know what you're talking about. Sharon confessed. I have all the proof. I know you orchestrated everything. The intercepted calls. The returned letter. The tip to CPS. Roger leaned back in the chair, and for a moment his face showed an expression Edward had never seen before. Pure hatred. So, you finally found out, Roger said, dropping the friendly facade completely. Took you long enough. Why, Roger? Why would you do this? Roger stood and walked to the window. You really want to know? Because I loved you, Edward, for 15 years. I loved you. And you never even noticed. A chill ran down Edward's spine. Roger. Helena was in the way. She always was. You were obsessed with her, couldn't see anything else. So I thought, if she were out of the picture, maybe you'd finally see me. But you encouraged me to work more, to travel more. Exactly. I knew it would destroy your marriage. And when Helena started calling desperately pregnant, I saw the perfect opportunity. If you didn't know about the child, she would give up for good. Edward clenched his fists. You made me lose 6 years of my daughter's life. Your daughter? Roger laughed bitterly. You didn't even know she existed a few weeks ago. I was the one who took care of you all these years, who stood by you through every decision, every victory. And what do I get? You abandon everything for a child you barely know. That child is my daughter, Roger. And Helena. I still love Helena. Roger's face contorted with rage. "You'll regret ever finding out the truth, Edward. I'll destroy you. I'll prove to the board that you're mentally unstable, that you abandoned the company in a psychotic breakdown." "You're not destroying anything else, Roger. I'm suing you for fraud, mail tampering, and I'm going to make sure you never get near my family again." "Your family?" Roger let out a sinister laugh. "Helena only took you back because of your money. And as for Louisa, she's just a confused kid who barely knows you." Edward took a threatening step toward Roger. "Don't you dare talk about them like that." "Or what? You'll hit me. That would only prove you really are unstable." At that moment, the door opened and Helena entered, accompanied by Charles Miller and Robert Kane, the investigator. "Pardon the intrusion," said Mr. Miller, "but we needed more evidence, and Helena agreed to help." Edward noticed Helena was wearing a discreet recording device. "Helena," Roger tried to regain his composure, "don't believe his fantasies. Edward has always been—" "A liar," Helena cut him off. "I heard everything. I heard you confess that you deliberately destroyed my family." "Roger Andrews," Robert Kane stepped forward, "you are being served with a subpoena. Your bank accounts have been frozen by court order, and the company will be notified of corporate fraud." Roger looked from one person to the next, realizing he was trapped. His mask had fallen completely. "You don't know what you're doing," he said, his voice trembling. "Edward, you were always weak. That's why you needed me to make the tough decisions." "The only decisions you ever made," Edward replied, "were designed to manipulate me and destroy my family." "That's over, Roger." As security escorted Roger from the building, Edward turned to Helena, who was visibly shaken. "Helena, thank you for doing that. I know it was hard." "Edward, when I heard him confess, when I realized you truly didn't know about Louisa," Helena began to cry. "I hated you for 7 years for something you never did." Edward approached hesitantly. "Helena, you had no way of knowing. But I should have trusted you. I should have fought harder to find you. The important thing is that we know the truth now." Helena looked into Edward's eyes. "Edward, can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "When you told Roger that you still love me, did you mean it?" Edward took a deep breath, knowing his answer would change everything. "Helena, I never stopped loving you, not for a single day." Helena stared at him for long seconds, as if making the most important decision of her life. "Edward, I think it's time we tried to be a real family." Helena's words echoed in the office like a heavenly song to Edward. A real family. He had dreamed of those words for months, but never imagined they could become reality. "Helena, are you sure?" Edward asked, his voice trembling with emotion. "I spent 7 years hating you for something you never did. I've spent months watching you transform into a devoted father, watching you give up everything for the good of our daughter. How can I not be sure?" Charles Miller discreetly indicated he was leaving the room, leaving Edward and Helena alone. The silence between them was charged with years of hurt, but also with renewed hope. "Helena, I need you to know, I don't expect us to go back to how we were. We're different people now." "That's true. I'm stronger, more independent, and you've finally learned what really matters in life, and what really matters." Helena smiled for the first time since Edward had re-entered her life. "Our daughter, and maybe the 3 of us together." When they went to pick up Louisa from school that afternoon, she immediately noticed something had changed between her parents. "Why are you guys holding hands?" she asked, with the typical curiosity of a 6-year-old. Edward and Helena looked at each other. "Louisa," Helena knelt beside her daughter, "what would you think if Mommy, Daddy, and you all went to live together?" Louisa's eyes widened. "All together, in the same house?" "Yes, my girl," Edward confirmed. "If you want to, of course." Louisa jumped for joy, hugging both her parents. Yes, I've always wanted this. We're going to be a family just like my friends. Families." In the following days, Edward and Helena talked for long hours about how to build this new version of their family. They decided to start slowly. Edward would move into a house near Helena's, and they would gradually spend more time together. "Edward," Helena said one night, as they watched Louisa play in the yard, "I'm scared." "Scared of what?" "I'm scared you'll go back to being that man obsessed with work. I'm scared this is all just a phase." Edward took Helena's hand. "Helena, do you remember that day at the park when Louisa asked if I missed my work?" "I remember. She noticed the change in me herself. She said I talk to her with a daddy voice now. This change isn't temporary, Helena. It's who I've become." A week later, Edward had an important conversation with his company's board. With the evidence of Roger's fraud and his own need to maintain a work-life balance, he proposed a radical restructuring. "I want to retain only 30% of the company," Edward announced. "I'm selling 40% to external investors and distributing 30% to long-term employees as profit sharing." "Mr. Morgan," said the CFO, "that means you'll no longer be the majority owner." "Exactly. I want to be just another director, working normal business hours with weekends free for my family." The decision shocked the corporate world, but Edward had never felt more certain about anything in his life. A month later, on a sunny Sunday afternoon, Edward was in the garden of the new house they had bought together, a simple but cozy home where Louisa could play freely. Helena approached, carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. "You know, Edward, sometimes I still can't believe we're here." "Me neither. Sometimes I think I'm going to wake up and find out it was all a dream." "Daddy, Mommy." Louisa ran toward them, holding a red rose she had picked from the garden. "Look at this pretty rose. Do you remember when I used to sell roses on the street?" Edward hugged his daughter. "I remember, my girl, but you don't have to sell flowers anymore. Now you can just enjoy them." "That's right. Now I have a daddy who takes care of Mommy and me." That night, after putting Louisa to bed, Edward and Helena sat on the porch, watching the stars. "Helena, can I ask you a question?" "Of course. Do you forgive me? For all the lost years, for not being the husband you deserved back then?" Helena took Edward's hand. "Edward, there's nothing left to forgive. We found out we were victims of a cruel manipulation. What matters is that we found our way back to each other." "And Louisa?" "Louisa has a complete family for the first time in her life. Look at her. Have you ever seen a happier child?" Edward smiled, thinking of his daughter sleeping peacefully in the next room, knowing she would wake up in a house full of love. "Helena, I love you. I love you both more than I ever thought possible." "We love you too, Edward. Welcome back to the family." For the first time in 7 years, Edward Morgan felt truly whole. 6 months after the reunion that changed their lives, on a golden spring morning, Edward woke to the sound of laughter coming from the garden. Through the window, he saw Helena and Louisa planting rose seedlings in the flower bed they had prepared together the previous weekend. "Daddy!" Louisa shouted when she saw him at the window. "Come help! We're planting the roses you promised." Edward smiled, remembering the promise he had made months ago, that one day Louisa would grow flowers for pleasure, not out of necessity. He dressed quickly and joined the 2 most important women in his life in the garden. "How's the project going?" he asked, kneeling beside his daughter. "Mommy said these roses will be the prettiest in the neighborhood because they're being planted with love," Louisa replied, her small hands carefully packing soil around a seedling. Edward looked at Helena, who was smiling as she watched her daughter work. In the past few months, they had learned to be a family again, not the same family they were before, but something new and better. "You know, Louisa," Edward said, helping her with the soil, "these roses remind me of how we met, when I was selling flowers on the street." "Exactly. Do you remember the first thing that caught my attention about you?" Louisa thought for a moment. "My eyes?" "Your eyes, yes, but also your determination. Such a little girl, working so hard to take care of her mommy. It showed me what a special person you were." Helena stopped planting and looked at Edward. You know what I admire most about you now, Edward? What's that? You remember every detail of that first meeting. You value our story, even the hard parts. At that moment, Mrs. Diaz appeared at the fence, carrying a cake. "Good morning, family. I brought a carrot cake for you." "Mrs. Diaz." Louisa ran to hug the neighbor who had been so important during the difficult times. "Child, look how you've grown in these months. And what a beautiful garden you're making." Edward stood up and approached the woman who had cared for his daughter when he didn't even know she existed. "Mrs. Diaz, I don't know how to thank you for everything you did for them." "Edward, dear, sometimes God puts people in our lives to look after one another. I looked after Louisa, but she filled my life with joy too." As they enjoyed the cake at the garden table, Louisa asked a question that took Edward by surprise. "Daddy, are you happy now?" Edward stopped chewing and looked at his daughter. "Why do you ask, sweetie?" "Because before, when you would show up to buy my roses, you looked so sad. Even when you smiled at me, your eyes were sad." Edward was moved by his daughter's perception. "And now, what are my eyes like now?" Louisa studied him carefully. "Now they shine, like Mommy's when she tucks me in at night." Helena took Edward's hand under the table. "To answer your question, Louisa, yes, Daddy is very happy now. We all are." That afternoon, after Mrs. Diaz had left and Louisa was napping in the garden hammock, Edward and Helena walked among the rose seedlings they had planted. "Edward," Helena said softly, "do you regret anything?" "I regret losing the first 6 years of her life. I regret not fighting harder for our marriage back then. But I don't regret the path that brought us here." "Why?" "Because if things had been different, maybe I never would have learned what truly matters. Maybe I never would have become the man I am today, the father Louisa deserves." Helena stopped and faced him. "Edward, there's something I never told you." "What is it?" "That first day, when you bought all of Louisa's roses, she came home beaming. She said she had met an angel, that a very kind man had saved her day." Edward felt tears burn his eyes. "She said that." "She did. And I thought, what a strange coincidence, because you always used to say that I was your guardian angel." As the sun began to set, Louisa woke up and joined her parents in the garden. The three of them sat on the grass, watching the first stars appear in the sky. "Daddy," Louisa said, snuggling between her parents, "Can I make a wish?" "Of course, my girl. When our roses bloom, can we give some to the sad children we see on the street, so they can feel special like I felt when you bought my flowers?" Edward hugged his daughter, realizing she had inherited not only her mother's golden eyes, but also a generous heart that wanted to spread the same joy she had received. "That's a wonderful idea, Louisa. We'll do just that." As the family contemplated their rose garden under the starlight, Edward reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them there. From a lonely, work-obsessed businessman, he had become a present father and a devoted partner. Helena had transformed her pain into strength, and Louisa had taught them both that true love blossoms in the most unlikely circumstances. The roses that once symbolized desperation and need now represented hope, growth, and the proof that it's never too late to discover what truly matters in life. And in that garden, under the starry sky, a family had finally found its way back home.